New at 6, modern-day school segregation. An Atlanta mother claiming children are being assigned to classes based solely on race at Mary Lynn Elementary in Atlanta. And now she's filing a civil rights complaint with the U.S. Department of Education.
So we all understand that post the death of George Floyd, we saw the most destructive riots in American history. But even worse than the riots, if you can believe it, were all the different policy changes that were made in the wake and in response to these rioters who, of course, were destroying huge portions of our nation. Our country decided to essentially pander to these people, allow them to destroy, and then reward them for doing so and pretend that they were the victims. Now, of course, this kind of pandering ranged from absolutely stupid, absurd, and ridiculous all the way to racist policies that we thought were long gone in this nation. And what we're going to talk about today isn't the dumb things that we remember, like trigger warnings on old school movies for not being woke enough because they were made at a time when woke wasn't a thing. We're not going to talk about all the kneeling in solidarity with George Floyd, even though these people were angry at the fact that Derek Chauvin kneeled on George Floyd. What we're going to do is visit this school in Georgia. And by the way, credit to Matt Walsh for recently highlighting this story. Otherwise, I would have missed it. That decided to reinstitute old school Jim Crow style segregation, where they separated the black students into their own classrooms, and then of course had the evil white racist students in their classrooms. However, this wasn't an evil white racist behind this particular policy. It was actually a woke black female principal who tried to sell this to the school. And the crazy thing about this is that although normally we see these kind of attempts to smuggle the premises into these particular classrooms, this principal was just outright saying it, that blacks and whites should be separated. And when a black mother objected, she tried to recruit her into her anti-white crusade. And this is what we're going to talk about today, the craziness in this Georgia school. But before we do, I want to thank everybody who supports this channel via actualjusticewarrior.com/join.
CBS 46's Jamie Kennedy talked to both sides.
So I just want to point out right off the top, one of the things that I find interesting about almost all the segments that are covering this story back in 2021 when it was exposed by this mother, and that is a bunch of these segments talk about how they're actually interviewing both sides. They're hearing the other side of the argument, you know, the side against racial segregation, and then the side in favor of Jim Crow style racial segregation. And back in the day when this stuff was going down, of course, when it's at the hands of black people, this was all covered in such a soft, weak way, even though, again, if a white person even suggested doing something similar to this, people would freak out, lose their minds, and of course, deservedly so. We're already past the era of segregation, we're past the era of separate but equal, and even though people are totally free to associate voluntarily with whom they please, and if they want to do it on racial lines, that's 100% on them. Again, black student unions and all these other different various volunteer organizations. This is different. This is back to the foundational rationale of Brown v. Board of Ed, where you have a principal saying, yes, we will separate based on race, but it's a good thing because black people are doing it in order to get away from the evil white racist children.
There was a pit in my stomach. It's you can't do it. It's against the law.
That law is the Civil Rights Act of 1964, saying you cannot treat a group of people differently based on their race, which is what Kyla Posey says happened when she tried to enroll her daughter into a second grade class at an Atlanta public school.
So here you have a mother who happens to be the hero of today's story that essentially looked at what was going on in her daughter's school and decided to come forward. But the way this started was actually rather ordinary. This mother wanted to put her kid in a classroom with a teacher that she thought was a good teacher. She thought it would be a better environment. However, the principal of the school, the mastermind behind this Jim Crow style segregation, decided to take it upon herself to call this mother herself and tell her that she thinks her child would be more comfortable amongst her own kind. Again, had this been a white principal, this would be national news to this very day. This wouldn't be a story that got barely any attention back in 2021 that was recently revisited by Matt Walsh when he rediscovered it, only to be revisited by me today when I discovered it, this would be something that people would be talking about all the time, and you'd have a bunch of people on the left-wing blackosphere media talking about how, oh, remember, segregation actually went down in Atlanta public schools as recently as 2021. You think evil white racism isn't dominant in all of our nation right now? Well, here we have this incident over at this elementary school, but because a black woman was behind it, because it was supposedly to benefit black people, we don't hear about it. We don't get it discussed on the national media. It got barely any attention at the time, even though it's patently ridiculous and absurd. Now, of course, it's funny to hear this particular news anchor talk about how the law that she's saying this violates is the Civil Rights Act. Again, a giant Civil Rights Act violation, not getting any attention at all whatsoever. Obviously, this has to do with the fact that black people are violating it, because has it been in the reverse, the zebra challenge, obviously people would be furious about this. Obviously, people would be going crazy, and yet it is just allowed to stand. In fact, this is very much treated by this principal as the same as a university having a blacks-only dorm or a black-only graduation ceremony, which is something that, again, has perked up even more post the Black Lives Matter riots, although a lot of that stuff actually predates the Black Lives Matter riots.
We've lost sleep trying to figure out, like, why would a person do this?
Kyla Posey says she was stunned when she learned about classes segregated by race at Mary Lynn Elementary last year, a practice she says was put in place and condoned by Principal Sharon Briscoe.
First, it was just disbelief that I was having this conversation in 2020 with a person that looks just like me, a black woman. It's segregating classrooms. You cannot segregate classrooms. You can't do it.
Posey says she found out the school was putting black students in 2 separate classes with 2 separate teachers. The white kids were placed in 6 classes with 6 different teachers. The parent says she found this out when she let Briscoe know she wanted her child placed in the classroom of a teacher she thought would be a good fit. Posey says the principal said that wouldn't work.
She said that that's not one of the black classes, and I immediately said, what does that mean? I was confused. I asked for more clarification. I was like, we have those in the school? And she proceeded to say that, yes, I have decided that I'm going to place all of the black students in 2 classes.
You know, it's always incredibly refreshing to hear somebody that just sounds normal, to hear somebody that just sounds logical and sensible. So when she gets a call from the principal and the principal says, we think your child would be comfortable amongst their own kind, we're going to put them in the blacks only classroom, this woman doesn't get outraged and angry. She actually gets confused, and she's like, wait a minute, what the hell are you talking about? We have blacks only classrooms in this elementary school in this current year that this is going on. Are you serious? And by the way, it is no coincidence at all whatsoever that this sensible woman happens to be married, happens to be raising her child in a 2-family household, and happens to live in a nice house. This is somebody in the black middle class, black upper middle class. Obviously, that's because of her actions, behaviors, the fact that she took responsibility in her own life. She actually pursued the ability to achieve and did achieve. So right here before our very eyes, we are seeing a regular, normal black person that is in a stable family unit confronting a black radical who's absolutely insane. And again, not even realizing the conflict that she's in because she thought this was going to be a regular, standard, ordinary phone call.
It's been a year since the first conversations with the school about the separated classes. Posey has 17 years experience in education, and her husband is the school psychologist at Mary Lynn with 23 years experience. She says she tried to make things right directly with the school, then with APS administrators who, in a phone recording by Posey, says the principal does separate black children.
So you hear a little bit about her background, you hear about her husband's background, you find out that her husband actually works at the school. So because the husband is a school psychologist, you can see why the mom actually requested this specific classroom with this specific teacher for her own daughter, because obviously she thought that this would be the best environment for her own child. And of course, the school has this racial segregation policy. It also comes down to the teachers. You need to have the black teachers reaching the black youths, according to this person, even though, again, the principal's assertions are ridiculous and absurd. And again, I will emphasize, this is not a situation where you have a black organization that is a voluntary organization. These people are taking money from the taxpayers, taking money not just from the Georgia taxpayers, but again, some federal money ends up coming in, and they're using that taxpayer funding in order to reinstitute old school segregation, in order to actually practice this. And again, we have a phone call that actually confirms that this exists, and yet this was not a national news story back when it broke. This was not treated as a big deal back in the day, even though, again, these people are so emboldened that they will blatantly say, yes, we are segregating based on race, because those evil white racist second graders, they actually can't be trusted to be around our precious black youths.
Posey says she insisted her child be placed in a class with white students. She says Briscoe explained her child would be isolated.
And I explained to her she shouldn't be isolated or punished because I'm unwilling to go along with your illegal and unethical practice.
The Poseys recorded a call with an assistant principal where they complained about the segregated classes. The administrator confirmed it was the principal's decision and seemed to offer an explanation why the classes were set up this way.
We have more black kids too, and then some of them are in a class because of the services that they need.
Now again, look at this local news report. Look at the attention level that this story is getting in comparison to other stories of alleged racism. I mean, again, a white woman arguing with a black person gets way more attention than this particular case, even if we find out that the narrative surrounding that argument actually is completely wrong and the white woman is 100% in the right. People love those particular stories, but this one, the school doesn't even feel the need to comment on whether or not this is happening. We didn't hear any reports early on about the principal being put on paid administrative leave, which is a standard thing anytime a controversy ends up occurring. And the reason for this is because, oh, you know, she meant well. She meant well when she said those white kids were demonic, evil, white racists, and we couldn't have our precious black beba angels near them in any of the classrooms. So, you know, we're just gonna, like, see if this blows over, because probably it will blow over because people aren't that concerned about racist black people in a bunch of our institutions, including our public education system.
Bond, Posey and her husband have subsequently filed a civil rights complaint with the US Department of Education and say real change needs to happen at the school.
We want to make sure that this practice is not going on. That's first and foremost. The second thing that we want to make sure that administrative team, they need to scrap it and start over.
So to me, these demands are perfectly reasonable. Again, when you actually violate the Civil Rights Act in a governmental institution, something that the Civil Rights Act was expressly written to actually engage with, this should be a no-brainer. But of course, the administrative team over at this elementary school, over at Atlanta Public Schools, don't have any brains. So they can't actually comply with this because they're actually very much not that smart. And of course, these are the people that are educating the future generations of Atlanta public school students. So good luck to the city of Atlanta going forward when you have these people with segregation as a good idea at the top of their mind. Can't wait for them to teach us the real history and complain about how all these evil white racist Republicans are blocking the real history from being taught.
Kyla Posey has filed this discrimination complaint with the U.S. Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights. Her attorney, Sharice Shields, says what's going on at Mary Lynn is a violation of Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964.
Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 say that you cannot treat one group of people differently based upon race, and that is what is going on at Mary Lynn.
So this lawsuit actually ended up concluding recently, and it turns out Atlanta Public Schools had to pay this mother $500,000 due to this discrimination. $500,000 because they were caught dead to rights doing segregation. Ridiculous, absurd. Also, it's important to understand that even though a $500,000 settlement was paid, the principal behind this is still employed at Atlanta Public Schools. Still works there, still listed anyway. Maybe it's actually wrong, I don't know, but that's crazy. But what's even more absurd is that the initial response back in the day when this issue was raised was, of course, to engage in the cover-up and retaliation.
Posey also claims that there has been retaliation against her and her husband from the school. She also feels like the APS and the US Department of Education are dragging their feet in doing anything on the matter.
So yeah, the local news segment ends up closing by saying that there was retaliation taken against her, taken against her husband who works at the school, and there's a feeling among her at the time that the Department of Education is actually slow walking this. You actually have the Atlanta Public Schools slow walking this, and the reason for this is very much because they didn't want this to become a story. They didn't want this to get out of hand, and as we've seen time and time again, our society, our systems, the left-wing ideology exists to excuse the racial hatred of black people, pretend like it's perfectly not only normal but acceptable, something worthy of being praised. So obviously this woman is taking a step out of line with their orthodoxy, and that means that she must be burned like a witch at the stake in order for other people to understand that this is unacceptable. You don't get to speak out against this, even if you're a black woman, because guess what? The Marxist black woman who's the principal of this school knows better for you than you know for your own kids. But you know what? Those are just my thoughts on this particular case. I want to know what you guys think about all this down in the comments below. As per usual, if you like this video, show them by leaving a like, subscribe for more content, follow me on my social medias, support me via the support links in the description of this video. This has been me talking about a black principal deciding to bring back racial segregation in Atlanta. Till next time.